Stop and think. How many things did you used to do, be, feel in 3D that you just can't anymore in 5D? List mentally. Now accept it. They will never come back. And when you understand why, you'll stop fighting it and finally be grateful. What if I told you that the fifth dimension is not a place you go to, but a door that closes behind you? It's not about gaining powers. It's not about constant light. It's about losing people you thought were forever, losing the need to please, losing the old version of yourself who can no longer survive in the new frequency. Maybe you felt it, conversations that used to make sense, now they sound empty. Environments that were once normal, now they weigh on your soul. And the scariest thing, you can't go back, because after consciousness expands, ignorance becomes impossible. The question is not whether you have changed. The question is, are you prepared for what will never come back? No one warns that awakening has a price. Everyone talks about the lights, the expansion, the 5D consciousness, as if it were just a gain, as if dimensional ascension is a no-cost upgrade, a spiritual promotion that comes with bonuses and no discount on anything. But the hidden truth that few have the courage to say out loud is that entering the fifth dimension of truth means losing things, 7 specific things, and lose them in a way that has no return, irreversible, no return, like a one-way portal that only opens forward. And the most disturbing? These invisible losses will happen regardless of whether the person is prepared or not. The paradox that no one explains is that these 7 permanent losses are, at the same time, the 7 greatest liberations that a human being can experience. But coming to this conclusion without first understanding what exactly goes away and why it never comes back is like trying to enjoy the ocean without ever leaving your room. The final awakening is not the end of suffering. It is the beginning of a different kind of journey, more conscious, deeper, more real, and for that very reason, more challenging in ways that showcase spirituality will never show. The dark side exists, and knowing it is what separates those who have really entered the high frequency from those who are still in the anteroom thinking they have arrived. What you will find from now on is not self-help content. It is an honest map of what the dimensional upgrade does to relationships, to identity, to fears, to the way of inhabiting the world and relating to the people around you. Each of the 7 things that never come back will be unraveled with the depth it deserves, including the hard side that no one mentions and the hidden gain that only those who have gone through it understand. If you already feel like you don't fit in where you used to, that you can't pretend what you used to do, that something has changed in a way that you don't quite know how to explain, this content was made for you. Comment below the number 7 if you have ever felt that something inside you has changed forever. Let's find out together what it was. There is a moment in the journey of the awakening that no one warns in advance. It's silent, almost imperceptible. But when it happens, it changes everything. It is the intersection of a one-way portal where 5D consciousness ceases to be a concept and becomes a real, visceral, permanent experience. And then, unceremoniously, without warning, 7 things begin to die within the person, not out of weakness, not out of carelessness, but because the high frequency that he has come to inhabit simply has no room for them. What draws attention in this final awakening is not what the person gains, it is what he realizes that he never comes back. Relationships that once seemed normal start to weigh too much. Fears that once moved her lose their ground. Environments that were once routine become physically unbearable. And the most curious, she didn't force any of that. It was not a rational decision, it was not a list of spiritual goals. It was the dimensional upgrade happening from the inside out, reorganizing everything without asking permission. And this is where the paradox lies, that most cannot see at first glance. These invisible losses are not tragedies, they are the price, and at the same time the prize of dimensional ascension. Each thing that goes away carried a weight that the person didn't even know they were carrying. Each never again is, deep down, a door that closes on the wrong side forever. The question is not whether it hurts. The question is what remains after the dust settles. And what awaits on the other side is something worth every step of this crossing. When someone hears about the fifth dimension, the first image that comes to mind is usually something mystical, distant, reserved for Tibetan monks or people who meditate 8 hours a day on a mountain. But 5D consciousness is not a physical place. It is not an exclusive club, and it does not require any special ritual of entry. It is a heightened frequency of perception, a state where unconditional love, full presence, and the sense of oneness with everything cease to be pretty ideas and become the default way of seeing reality. It is as if the operating system of the soul received a complete dimensional upgrade, and the old one simply did not run anymore. What makes this process irreversible is exactly what makes it so transformative. Think of a simple analogy: a child learning to read. She can pretend she doesn't know, she can close the book, she can avoid the words, but her brain has already been rewired. Reading is there, installed, permanent. With the new earth of expanded consciousness, it works the same way. Certain 3D structures, fear as fuel, the illusion of separation, the ego that needs to control everything, collapse because the perception that sustained them simply no longer exists. Permanent change is not willpower. It is a natural consequence of seeing what cannot be unseen, and that is precisely why the recalibrated nervous system of those who have gone through this transition reacts so differently to the world. It's not affectation, it's not spiritual posturing, it's not someone trying to look enlightened. It is someone who genuinely cannot operate at the same frequencies as before, and who begins to realize, sometimes with surprise and sometimes with butterflies in the stomach, that certain things that were part of their daily life are disappearing one by one with no return. And the first of them, it will mess with something that almost everyone considers harmless. But that drains more energy than anyone realizes. There was a time when people could spend hours in a conversation circle talking about gossip, about what so-and-so posted on the networks, about the weather, about nothing. And that was okay. It was comfortable, familiar, socially accepted. Superficial relationships were part of the package of normal life, and she fit into them without much effort. But when 5D consciousness begins to really settle in, something changes in the body before it even changes in the mind. An empty conversation begins to generate real physical fatigue, almost as if the body is rejecting a food that it no longer nourishes. It is not judgment, it is pure energy incompatibility. What happens is that high frequency requires authenticity as a basic condition of operation. And falsehood, even that gentle, polite, socially acceptable falsehood, creates an internal dissonance that the body simply can't sustain anymore. The person begins to notice that they leave social events more tired than they entered, that certain friendships of years begin to seem hollow, that feigning interest in a conversation has become an effort that they can no longer disguise. This is the dark side that no one mentions when talking about spiritual awakening. The dimensional loneliness that comes with it, silent and heavy, when 90% of the old bonds begin to no longer fit into the new frequency. But here lies a hidden truth that transforms everything. When real connection appears, and it does, it has a depth that one has never experienced before. It is not that friendship of convenience. It is not that relationship maintained by habit. It is soul contact, genuine exchange, presence that nourishes rather than drains. Social incompatibility with the old world does hurt, but it makes room for something that has no comparison with what was left behind. And speaking of things that are left behind, the next permanent loss is even quieter and affects every second of every day of anyone's life. There's something very comfortable about living on autopilot. Waking up, coffee, work, lunch, work, home, Netflix, sleeping, and repeating, without much questioning, without much feeling, without much weight. The routine without conscience has an anesthetizing charm that most people don't even realize they are under. It was simple, predictable, safe, and for a long time that was enough. But when constant presence begins to settle in as a default state, rather than a weekend meditative practice, the automatic ceases to be a refuge and becomes a physical impossibility. Expanded consciousness no longer accepts autopilot. Period. What changes is almost disconcerting at first. The person begins to feel every choice, every word they speak, every meal they eat, every moment that passes. Living unconscious becomes physically impossible, and that includes the moments when she would most like to switch off. He no longer has that state of functional numbness that let the days pass without much friction. Each pattern is visible. Each habit is exposed. Each moment has weight and texture. It's as if someone had turned on all the lights in a house where the person lived in the dark. Practical before, impossible to ignore now. The recalibrated nervous system simply no longer knows how to pretend not to see. And here comes the paradox that few talk about. This total presence is tiring. Being awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without the automatic resource to take a break, it's exhausting in a way that only those who have been through it understand. It's not the fatigue of those who worked hard. It is the fatigue of those who felt a lot, realized a lot, were present in every detail of a whole day. But it is exactly this fatigue that separates those who exist from those who really live. Every moment has depth, it has meaning, there's something real going on in it. And speaking of something that moves people in a very real way, the next thing that never comes back is perhaps the most surprising of all, because all my life I was taught that it was necessary to survive. Think about how many important life decisions have been made based on fear. The college chosen for fear of not having stability. The job he kept for fear of not finding another one. The relationship sustained by fear of being alone. Opinions swallowed up for fear of rejection. Fear as the main motivator is so normalized in 3D that most people don't even realize that they are being driven by it. They think it is responsibility, that it is prudence, that it is maturity. But when 5D consciousness really sets in, that fuel simply runs dry. Not by courage, not by willpower, by real genuine absence of the fear that once drove everything. What happens is that the person has had a glimpse or a deep certainty that he is eternal consciousness experiencing a temporary form. And when this ceases to be a beautiful phrase and becomes a real experience, death loses the power to terrorize, rejection loses the power to paralyze, failure loses the power to humiliate. Fear literally finds nowhere to cling because the beliefs that sustained it have collapsed. The action continues to happen, but now it is born of love, curiosity, the genuine desire to expand. It's the difference between building something because you love what you're creating and building something because you're terrified of what happens if you don't build it. The result may look the same from the outside, but the experience inside is completely different. The hard side, and this is one of the dark sides that no one warns about, is that 3D society was built on fear as a motivational tool. Deadline, demand, urgency, veiled threat. When the person stops responding to this system, he begins to seem irresponsible to those who still operate in it. How come you don't worry about that? Becomes a frequent question. But what looks like detachment outwards is, in fact, the authentic freedom of those who act by choice and not by reaction. And speaking of reaction, the next thing that disappears with no return is directly linked to one of the greatest illusions that human beings carry. that controlling everything is what keeps life safe. There is a type of tiredness that only those who have lived obsessed with control know. It's the fatigue of trying to predict each variable, of putting together plan B, plan C, plan D, of spending hours reconstructing mental scenarios of things that may never happen. Obsessive control has a seductive logic. It looks like responsibility. It looks like intelligence. It seems that the person is ahead of the problems, but deep down, it's fear with planning clothes. And when surrender to the natural flow begins to happen in earnest, not as a spiritual technique, but as a consequence of expanded consciousness, this need to control everything begins to dissolve, slowly, with no return. What transforms everything is when the person experiences the real flow for the first time. Not the flow she read in a self-help book. The flow she experienced, that moment when she let go of something important and the universe responded in a way that no planning of hers would have come close to, a door that opened by itself, a connection that came at the right moment, a solution that appeared when she stopped pushing. Anyone who has experienced this at least once knows. Controlling has become a useless effort that only delays what is already on the way. Permanent change is not in deciding to trust. It is in not being able to no longer trust after having seen the flow work. The difficult side is real and deserves to be said honestly. Family worries, friends question, and the person starts to hear things like, "You don't take anything seriously," or "How come you don't have a plan?" with a frequency that tires. But what seems irresponsible to those who still need to control everything is, in fact, a more sophisticated way of navigating life, surfing instead of rowing against the tide. Less anxiety, more presence, and a lightness that the person no longer exchanges for any control spreadsheet. And speaking of things that the person no longer exchanges, the next permanent loss is perhaps the most profound of all, because it goes straight to the answer to the question that everyone has asked since childhood: who am I? What do you do? It seems like a simple question, but it carries a huge weight, because in 3D, what the person does is who they are. Doctor, lawyer, mother, entrepreneur, victim, winner. The fixed identity works as a social anchor. It gives predictability, it gives belonging, it gives a ready answer to give at family gatherings without generating embarrassment. And for a long time, that looks like security. But when 5D consciousness begins to truly expand, something strange happens. These labels begin to seem too small. Not wrong, not bad, just small. Like an outfit that has fit well for years and suddenly tightens everywhere. What emerges in place is a fluid consciousness, which does not need a label to exist. The person discovers that he can be several things at the same time. He can change direction without betraying any previous version of himself. He can wake up different tomorrow without this being an identity crisis. This is infinite reinvention in practice, not as instability, but as real freedom to express oneself in different ways at different stages of life. Steve Jobs was abandoned, adopted, college dropout, enthusiastic calligraphy, founder, fired from his own company, and then the guy who changed the world's technology. Each phase seemed wrong to the fixed standard, and each phase was essential to building something that no label could contain. The difficult side is that the 3D world doesn't know how to deal very well with those who don't fit in a box. LinkedIn becomes a minefield. Resume becomes an exercise in creativity, and the question, "But after all, what are you?" begins to sound like an accusation. Dimensional loneliness appears here as well, not for lack of people, but for lack of people who understand that identity does not have to be fixed to be real. But those who go through this discomfort discover something precious on the other side. The lightness of not being trapped in any version of themselves. And speaking of weight, The next thing that never comes back is physical, sensory, and directly affects where the person chooses to be and who they choose to live with. There was a time when a crowded mall on Saturday was a normal program. A noisy office, a party until the early hours, happy hour with that colleague who drains everyone's energy. All of this was just part of social life, something you could endure at no cost. But when energy sensitivity skyrockets, and it does in a way you can't ignore, these environments go from being just uncomfortable to physically unbearable. It's not freshness, it's not drama, it's not the person getting weird. It is the expanded energy field capturing everything around it with an intensity that simply did not exist before. It's like leaving an ordinary antenna and becoming a satellite dish. Everything arrives stronger, clearer, heavier. What happens in practice is that dense environments start to really get sick. An hour in a place with heavy energy is more tiring than a full day of physical work. The person begins to cancel plans, to avoid places they once loved, to need long periods alone to recharge, not out of introversion, but out of a real need for energy detoxification. This is the necessary isolation that 5D consciousness imposes as a condition of functioning. And outsiders see it as spiritual antisocial, as someone who got old before his time, as someone who overcomplicated his own life. But those on the inside know that it's not a choice, it's energy survival. The gain, when the person stops fighting against this sensitivity and begins to honor it, is a quality of life that has no comparison with what existed before. He starts to frequent only what he really nourishes: people, places, conversations, environments. The conscious life that emerges from this is leaner, more intense, more real, less quantity, more depth in everything. And interestingly, the more a person protects their energy, the more they realize that the greatest source of density around them does not come from the places. It comes from a very specific, very old belief, which almost every human being carries without question, and which is the next thing that disappears with no return in the dimensional journey. From a young age, a person learns to divide the world into categories: me and the other, us and them, right and wrong, my team and the opposing team. My religion is the wrong one, my country and those abroad. The belief in separation is so fundamental in 3D that it seems not to be belief at all. It seems objective reality. It seems just the way it is. And for years, the person operates in this system without question, competing, defending territory, building invisible walls between himself and everything he considers different. But when the lived unity ceases to be a philosophical concept and becomes a real experience, that moment when boundaries dissolve and the person feels in the body that they are part of something much bigger, the separation becomes an obvious lie that they simply cannot believe anymore. No return. What emerges in place is a radical compassion that completely transforms the way we see people. When the pain of others begins to really hurt, when the joy of a stranger generates real joy, when the person looks at someone they would previously call an enemy and can see only a wounded part of the same whole trying to heal the way they know, judgment collapses. Not by spiritual effort, not by meditative discipline, by genuine impossibility of continuing to believe in a separation that she already knows does not exist. It is like trying to believe that the wave is separated from the ocean after having seen with absolute clarity that wave and ocean are the same thing expressed in different ways. The difficult side, and this is one of the most curious, is that those who have no enemies become suspect to everyone. The left thinks that the person is right-wing. The right thinks it is communist. Group A thinks that it is on the side of Group B, because in a world organized by the belief in separation, those who see the whole do not fit into any faction. Social incompatibility appears here in a political and everyday way, and dimensional loneliness deepens. But what the person gains in return is something that no side, no faction, no group can offer. The freedom to see the human being before the label, and to respond with presence where before he would respond with judgment. And now that the 7 things have been revealed, comes the part that completely changes the way you look at everything that has been said so far. There's a reframe that changes everything. And it's simple enough to fit in one sentence, but deep enough to take weeks to digest. Everything that never comes back after dimensional ascension was not actually the possession of the person. It was a loan from 3D. It was a limitation that she absorbed so early, so naturally, that she mistook it for identity. The fear was not hers. It was installed. Obsessive control wasn't her. It was a response to an environment that taught the world is dangerous. Tolerance for superficiality was uncharacteristic. It was adaptation to an environment that normalized shallow connections. So when these things go away, the person doesn't lose anything that was genuinely his. She loses the bars she has learned to call home. The paradox of invisible losses is that they have always been comfortably decorated prisons. Superficial relationships gave a sense of belonging, but they cost authenticity. The autopilot gave rest, but it cost presence. Fear as a motivator gave urgency, but it cost freedom. Each of these structures had a function, had a cost, and had an expiration date that expanded consciousness simply executes when the time comes. It's not punishment, it's not loss, it's not the universe being cruel. It is the operating system of the soul, removing what no longer serves to free up memory for what is coming. Dimensional upgrade does not add without first clearing. And here's the hidden truth that transforms the entire narrative. One didn't get any less after all of this. She was unable to be small again. Each never again is a tie that has fallen, a blindfold that has come off, a weight that has gone away without leaving an address. What remains after the dust settles is not empty. It is space. Space for conscious life that did not fit while the old structures occupied space. And it is exactly in this space that the person will discover, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with a smile on the corner of the mouth, that they miss some things that have gone away. And that this feeling, far from being weakness, is completely human and deserves to be looked at honestly. There is a moment in the journey of those who have awakened that no one likes to admit very much. It's that moment when the person looks back, not with regret, but with a strange, almost inexplicable longing, and thinks, it was easier before. Before seeing everything, before feeling so much, before no longer fitting into places that once seemed so comfortable. The nostalgia of 3D is real, it's valid, and there's nothing wrong with feeling it. It would be dishonest to say that conscious life is easy all the time, that dimensional loneliness doesn't weigh you down, that letting go of 90% of old connections doesn't leave a space that takes time to fill. Feeling nostalgia is not a return, it is humanity. But here's the question worth asking with brutal honesty, without romanticizing or dramatizing. Does the person really want to go back to 3D, or does he want the current journey to be less lonely? Because they are completely different things. To want to go back would be to exchange expanded consciousness for comfortable unconsciousness, and those who have seen it can no longer not see. This is the nature of the one-way portal. But wanting company on the way, wanting to meet people who understand without needing a long explanation, wanting to belong to a new tribe that vibrates at the same high frequency, that's not weakness. It is one of the most human needs that exist, and it is completely compatible with the final awakening. The difference between the two feelings changes everything in the way of going through this period. Those who confuse nostalgia for 3D with a real desire to return get stuck in a loop of unnecessary guilt and self-demand. Those who recognize that what they miss is belonging not unconsciousness, begin to direct energy toward finding their new tribe instead of trying to repair connections that have already fulfilled their role. And this clarity, small as it seems, relieves a huge burden. Because knowing exactly what you want, even when the path to get it is still unclear, is the beginning of everything. And speaking of clarity about the path, the next point reveals something about this journey that has the power to turn anxiety into something much more like relief. There is a silent fear that haunts many people in the midst of their spiritual journey, the fear of regression. To wake up one day and find that everything that was achieved, all the expanded consciousness, all the high frequency, was temporary. That it was a phase, an illusion, a passing, altered state. This fear is understandable, but it starts from a mistaken premise, that the evolution of consciousness works like humor, which rises and falls depending on the day. It doesn't work like that. The one-way portal has no back button. And truly understanding this, not as consolation, but as fact, transforms irreversibility from threat to present. The heavy lifting has already been done. This sentence deserves to be read slowly because it carries a relief that many people have not yet allowed themselves to feel. Every crisis, every difficult night, every relationship that didn't survive permanent change, every moment of dimensional loneliness, all of that was the real cost of the crossing, and it has already been paid. Dimensional ascension is not something that one needs to conquer every morning upon waking up. It is something that has already happened, that is recorded in the recalibrated nervous system, that does not depend on constant maintenance to continue existing. Just as no one needs to relearn how to walk every day, no one needs to regain consciousness that has already been integrated. And here's the real gift that irreversibility offers: true security. Not the false security of obsessive control, not the illusory security of plans that try to predict everything, the security of knowing that what has been conquered cannot be taken away. Every never again is victory set in stone, not as a limitation, but as a foundation. The person may have difficult days, they may miss it, they may wonder about the path, but they don't come back. And knowing this for real in the body completely changes the way you walk from now on. What also changes is the way of honoring everything that has been crossed, and that's exactly what comes next. Knowing that the transformation is irreversible is one thing. Knowing how to live well inside it is quite another, and this is where most people stumble, not for lack of awareness, but for lack of daily practice of honoring the process. The first, and perhaps most liberating of these practices, is simple. Stop forcing fit where it no longer exists. Stop trying to maintain friendships that have already completed their cycle. Stop frequenting environments that drain. Stop pretending that you still fit into old versions of yourself. Every time the person forces an impossible fit, he spends energy that could be used to build what comes. And what comes is always better than what was. It just needs space to appear. The second practice that transforms everything is to change the internal narrative about the "I can't do it anymore." Instead of looking at it as a flaw, as a weakness, as something wrong with the person, celebrate as an upgrade. When she can no longer feign interest in an empty conversation, that's not her being difficult. It's the recalibrated nervous system working exactly as it should. When she can no longer tolerate dense environments without feeling the weight physically, this is no frills. It is energetic sensitivity operating at high frequency. Documenting this journey helps immensely. A simple journal, notes on your phone, any record that allows you to reread it on days of doubt and remember how far you've come. Emotional memory is selective, and having concrete records of one's own evolution is an anchor in moments of fog. The deepest and perhaps the most difficult practice is kindness to yourself during the transition. Do not judge who is still in 3D, because the person has been there and knows that each one goes through the portal in their own time when they are ready. Do not blame yourself for not having gone further, because there is no fixed destination in conscious life. There is natural flow that moves at the right pace. And trust in timing, even when it doesn't make apparent sense, because what has been lost always makes room for what is coming, even when that space still seems too empty. The dimensional transition is not easy, but it is honorable. And those who have come this far have already proven to themselves that they have what it takes to continue. What comes now is the closing of a cycle, and one of the most powerful ways to start the next. There's a strange beauty about coming to the end of a journey and realizing that what was left behind wasn't real. It was construction. It was the set of beliefs, fears, patterns, and limitations that 3D offered as a standard package, and that the person accepted because that was all that was available at that time. Superficial relationships, living on automatic, fear as fuel, obsessive control, fixed identity, dense environments, belief in separation, none of these were essence. It was layer. And layer, by definition, can be removed without destroying what's underneath. What never comes back was not the core of the person. It was what covered the core, prevented it from breathing, limited how much it could expand. What remains after all these layers are gone is something that no permanent loss can touch. It is consciousness itself, expanded, free, vibrating at a high frequency that no longer decreases because it does not depend on external conditions to exist. It doesn't depend on approval. It doesn't depend on a perfect environment. It doesn't depend on other people understanding the process. The new earth that one now inhabits is not in a physical place. It is in the state of being that one has conquered and which, as has been said from the beginning, has no turning back. And this, far from being a limitation, is the greatest security that exists. It is knowing that what was built internally cannot be demolished by anything that comes from outside. Welcome to 5D. Not as a final destination, not as an arrival, but as a new starting point. The place from which everything that comes next will be built with more awareness, more authenticity, more depth than anything that has come before. Conscious life is not easier than life on automatic. It is more real. And those who chose reality over comfort, depth over superficiality, authentic freedom over illusory security, already know that they would not trade it back for anything. There is no turning back. And that's exactly how it should be. You've come this far, and that says a lot about who you are. Most people close the video in the middle, go back to the comfort of the automatic, prefer not to see what was shown here. But you stayed. And now comes the part that really matters. What are you going to do with all of this? Because knowledge without application is just sophisticated entertainment. And you didn't come here to be entertained. You came to be transformed. So stop for a second and ask yourself honestly, which of the 7 things have you noticed is going away in your life? Which one are you still trying to hold on tight, pretending you can hold on, when deep down you already know that the portal has been crossed? Conscious life does not begin when everything fits perfectly. It starts when the person stops pretending that they still fit where they no longer fit. It begins when she looks at dimensional loneliness, not as punishment, but as preparation. It begins when each never again ceases to be mourning and becomes a silent celebration of an upgrade that no one can reverse. You're already on the path. The question isn't whether you'll get there, it's whether you'll stop resisting what's already happening. So let me ask you directly, are you willing to let go of what is holding you back, to receive what is waiting for you? Or will you keep trying to fit into spaces that are already too small for who you've become? If this content touched something real inside you, if you recognized yourself in any of these 7 permanent losses, if for the first time someone said out loud what you felt but couldn't name, then you already know that this is the kind of content you can't find anywhere. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell, because what comes in the next videos will deepen this journey even more, with the same honesty, the same depth, and zero showcase spirituality. The new land is not for those who want comfort. It's for those who want truth, and you've just proven that you're in the right place.